There's a plant that will sink a single root straight down 10 feet into the ground, pull up minerals your vegetables can't reach, and then hand every bit of it back to you in a pile of leaves you can cut 4 or 5 times a summer for the rest of your life, off one planting, for nothing. Back in the 1960s, a British horticulturist measured a stand of it throwing off close to 100 tons of leaf to the acre, year after year, even on tired ground. He said plainly it could feed a garden without a single bag of fertilizer. And then the whole thing slid quietly off the seed racks and out of the catalogs and into the back corner of a few stubborn gardeners' beds, where it sits to this day. Nobody outlawed it. There's no law against this plant anywhere I know of. And if you've heard otherwise online, that's the first thing I mean to set straight for you. It didn't get banned. It got beat by a cheaper bag on the shelf, and by a scare over the wrong use of it that the garden stores were happy to let do their forgetting for them. Now I'll be straight with you the way a neighbor leaning on your fence would. I'm going to tell you what the old record actually shows, what I've watched this plant do on my own beds across more than 50 years, and where folks online have stretched it past what's true, because there's a real catch to this one. And a man who doesn't warn you about it isn't being a friend. The plant is comfrey. By the end, you'll know how to grow your own free fertilizer for the price of one root. And you'll know the one mistake that'll have you cursing my name for years if I don't tell you now. So let me tell you about the man who tamed it first, because the story is half the lesson. His name was Lawrence D. Hills, an Englishman born to bad eyesight and worse luck, who couldn't follow most ordinary trades and so turned the whole of his mind onto one plant. This was the early 1950s. The war not long over, the shelves still thin, the soil of England tired from being pushed too hard for too many years, and Hills got it into his head that this one deep-rooted weed, comfrey, could feed a hungry country off ground nobody else could make pay. There was just one trouble with it, and it's the same trouble I'm going to warn you about later, so mark it now. Wild comfrey spreads. It throws seed, and it comes up in the hedgerows and the fields where no farmer wanted it. And once it's in, it does not leave easy. No sensible grower was going to plant a thing on purpose that might take his whole field. Hills knew that. So he didn't just champion the plant, he set out to break it of its worst habit. In 1954, he founded a little outfit he called the Henry Doubleday Research Association, named for an old Quaker who'd grown comfrey a century before him. He worked out of a rented cottage in a village called Bocking in Essex. And by 1958, he'd got himself 3/4 of an acre there for £10 a year. And he began doing the patient, muddy, unglamorous thing that real knowledge is actually made of. He gathered up comfrey from old orchards and abandoned farms all over Britain, 1 in 20 different strains of it, and he planted them out side by side and watched them season after season in the rain and the drought, writing down every cutting weight and every regrowth. He was after one plant in particular, a comfrey that would give all that deep mining vigor and yet not set seed, a comfrey that would stay exactly where a man put it and spread no further. The vigor came from the Russian comfrey, a cross itself between the common comfrey of the hedges and a rougher, prickly kind out of the east. It grew like fury, but it also seeded like a weed. The common comfrey was tamer but stingier, so Hills crossed and recrossed them over and over, culling the failures without mercy, hunting for the one seedling that had the vigor of the one parent and the manners of neither. It took him years of it. He kept the records in his own cramped hand because he could barely afford help, and he tended those rows himself through more weather than was good for a man with his eyes. And by the early 60s, out of all those rows, a small handful of strains stood up above the rest. He numbered his trial plots plain, the way a careful man does, and gave each survivor the number of the plot it came from. Bocking 4, Bocking 10, and the one that beat them all, it had come out of plot 14, so that's what he called it, Bocking 14. That number matters to you, so hold on to it. Bocking 14 sets, no viable seed worth speaking of. It will not throw itself across your garden on the wind. It only multiplies when you cut the root and move a piece of it yourself. It tested out with the highest mineral content of the lot, especially potassium. And it shrugged off the rust disease that troubled the others. And here's the measure of the man. Hills never patented it, never locked it up. He mailed root cuttings out to anybody who wrote and asked, gardeners and smallholders the world over, for pennies or for nothing. He wanted the thing spread, not sold, which, as you'll see, is exactly the reason the rest of the world managed to forget it. So now you know the plant has a tame form with a name. Let me tell you why anybody bothered what's actually going on under the ground that makes one weed worth all that fuss. Think of comfrey as a pump, not a clever word I made up, a real pump, the kind that reaches down where the bucket can't and brings the deep water up. That's the whole secret of this plant. And I'll come back to that picture more than once, so hold it. Your vegetables are shallow feeders. A tomato, a bean, a head of lettuce. Their roots scratch around in the top foot or so of soil, eating up whatever's handy and leaving the rest. But every year the rain washes the minerals down past where those shallow roots can reach. Calcium, potassium, magnesium, they leach down, season on season, locked away 3, 6, 10 feet under your boots. May as well be on the moon for all the good they do your garden. Comfrey's taproot drills straight down into that. 6 feet, 8, 10 feet on a settled plant, down into the mineral veins your vegetables never touch. And it doesn't keep what it mines. It loads every bit of it into those big bristly leaves up top. So you've got a plant that spends all summer hauling up the fertility that leached away and stacking it where you can get at it again. The leaves are the payoff. Cut them and you're holding minerals that came from 10 feet down. That's the pump working for free while you sleep. And the numbers on those leaves are not small. Lab analysis of fresh Bocking 14 leaf runs somewhere around 2 to 3% nitrogen, around 1% phosphorus, and a potassium reading that climbs as high as 7%. That potassium is the part to notice. Potassium is what fruiting plants run on. It's what swells a tomato and sweetens it, what fills out a squash. Ordinary farmyard manure rarely breaks 1.5% potassium. Comfrey leaf can run 4 times that. You are growing in your own back corner a feed richer in the very mineral your fruiting crops crave than most of what's sold in a bag. And it gives it up fast, which is the other half of why it works. Most green stuff you lay on the ground, straw, old leaves, grass, is high in fiber, and it sits there for weeks, even months, breaking down slow, and for a while it actually ties up nitrogen as it rots, robbing your plants of the very thing you laid it down to give them. Comfrey is the opposite. Its leaf is soft and low in fiber and high in protein, and when you lay it down, the soil life swarms it. It's gone in a day or two, melts into a dark, crumbly layer in under 48 hours, releasing its load right where the roots are working. That's why the old gardeners called it a compost activator. Toss a heap of comfrey leaf onto a cold, stalled compost pile, and you'll feel it heat up by morning, sometimes 10 or 15 degrees, the microbes waking up and going to work on that soft green tissue like nothing else will rouse them. And don't take only my word for the way of it. There was a fellow over in the Lancaster settlement, I'll call him Melvin Reel, the way I remember the type, who for years fed his squash on nothing in this world but comfrey leaf, cut and dropped, no bag at any point. His squash came in heavy and sweet off ground. That wasn't much to look at. Now I can't swear it was only the comfrey and not Melvin's good eye for a plant. But I watched that pump fill those leaves, and those leaves fill that fruit year on year, and it taught me more than any chart of numbers ever did. Now here's the part of the story that ought to put a little iron in your spine. Because a plant this good, that asks nothing and gives everything, doesn't just fall out of fashion by accident. Let me tell it to you honest. With no villain, you have to swallow whole 2 things buried comfrey, and neither one was a law. The first was the cheap bag, The same years Hills was out in the mud counting cutting weights, the chemical fertilizer was coming into every farm and garden in a bright sack stamped with 3 numbers. The factory could pull nitrogen right out of the air now and box it up, and the whole pitch was speed. Why spend an hour cutting and hauling comfrey leaf when you could feed a whole row in 5 minutes with a scoop of blue powder? The extension offices taught the bag, the ads taught the bag, clean hands, clean boots, no waiting on leaves to rot, and the slow, living, deep-rooted plant that took a gardener's patience got quietly recast as old-fashioned. Nobody banned it. Nobody had to. There was simply no money in a plant you grow once and never buy again, and a great deal of money in a bag you buy every spring for the rest of your life. That's the whole suppression right there. No corporation profits when you grow your own fertilizer. So the catalogs stopped carrying it, and a generation grew up never hearing the word. The second thing was a scare, and I want you to understand it exactly, because this is where the lie online comes from. Around the turn of this century, the regulators did pull comfrey off the shelf, but not the plant in your garden. They pulled the comfrey pills and teas and tonics that some folks were swallowing, because the plant carries compounds, the long name is pyrrolizidine alkaloids, that can harm the liver if you eat them in any quantity. That warning was about swallowing concentrated comfrey. It had nothing to do with growing it for your tomatoes. But the headlines didn't bother with that distinction, and the word toxic got stuck to the plant's whole name, and the garden centers, who'd rather not stand there explaining the difference to every customer, just quietly took it off the bench. So you'll hear people online today say, comfrey is banned. It isn't. There is no law against growing comfrey or laying its leaves on your soil. What got pulled was a pill, not a plant. And I won't tell you a lie to make the story sound bigger than it is. So that's why you never heard of it. Not a conspiracy. Just a cheap bag nobody could compete with, and a scare about the wrong use that the stores were glad to let do the forgetting. The plant never stopped working. The world just stopped paying anyone to remember it. Now, let me give you exactly how to use it, because this is what you came for. And I'll give you the warning right alongside the method, the way an honest man does. First, get the right one and put it in the right place. Plant Bocking 14, the seed-sterile strain Hills bred, not wild comfrey out of a ditch. You're buying a root cutting, not seed. A finger length of root, set a couple inches under in spring. One root becomes a clump in a season. And here's the warning, the one I'd shake you by the shoulder over if I could. Choose that spot like you're choosing where to build, because comfrey does not move. Even Bocking 14, that won't seed itself across your garden, will regrow from the smallest scrap of root you leave behind if you ever try to dig it out. A piece the size of your thumbnail will come back. So, do not put it in the middle of a bed you'll want to change your mind about. Put it along a fence line, at the end of a row, in a corner of the orchard, somewhere you'll be glad to have a permanent green fountain for the next 20 years. Plant it deliberate, and it's a gift. Plant it careless, and it's a 40-year argument. I'll say it plain. This is a fertilizer plant, not a food and not a medicine. You grow it to feed your soil, never to feed yourself. Second, the simplest use, what the old-timers called chop and drop. Once the plant's up and established, give it a season to settle its root before you cut it hard. You take a handful of those big leaves, cut them at the base with a knife or a sickle, and you lay them right down on the soil at the foot of your tomatoes, your peppers, your squash, your berry canes. That's it. No digging, no mixing. Drop the leaves and walk off. In 2 days, they've melted into the ground and fed the very plants that need that potassium most, right when they're setting fruit. You can cut a settled clump 4 or 5 times across the season and wait about 4 weeks after each cutting, and it's lush and ready again. Third, if you want a liquid feed, there's comfrey tea. And I'll warn you on this one too, because it earns its reputation. Pack a bucket with the cut leaves, weigh them down, top it with water, and put a lid on it loose and set it somewhere downwind of the house. 2, 3 weeks. What you'll have is a dark brew that smells, honestly, like something died. There's no polite way around it. But it tests out richer in potassium than many a store-bought tomato feed. Dilute it down till it's the color of weak tea, pour it at the base of your fruiting plants, and watch your flower set. Strong stuff, free from a plant you cut without lifting your fertilizer bill $1. And here's the part that ought to put a little heat under your collar. Now you understand the pump. The same high nitrogen, high phosphorus bag that put comfrey out of business doesn't just replace the free fertility. Over time it works against the living soil that was giving it to you. Pour on enough quick chemical and you push out the earthworms and the fine soil fungus that ferry minerals to your roots for free. And you leave the ground leaning on the bag instead of standing on its own. So the cheap, convenient answer didn't only outsell the plant that gave everything away, it quietly tore up the free engine underneath and then sold you the fertility it cost you. That's worth being a little angry about. Now a word of honest expectation, because I won't oversell you. One little comfrey plant won't fertilize your whole garden the first year. It takes a season or two to settle that deep root and come into its full vigor. And you'll want 3 or 4 clumps, not one, to keep a real garden in leaf. On poor ground especially, give it time. But once it's running, it runs for 20 years and more off that single planting. And it asks nothing of you but the cutting. I rotted out my very first comfrey corner years back by cutting it to the ground too hard the same spring I set it, before the root had any strength under it. And it sulked a whole season for my impatience. So learn that off me, instead of the slow way. Set it, leave it be the first year, then cut it freely ever after. Let me catch my breath here a moment, because I've handed you a good deal. Here's where we stand. There's a real plant with a real tamed form, a real Englishman bred and named, that drills 10 feet down and pumps up fertility you'd otherwise have lost, and hands it back in a leaf that feeds your soil in 2 days flat. It fell out of the catalogs not because it failed, but because nobody could sell it, and got tarred by a scare that was never about the garden at all. And the only true catch, the one that matters, is that it stays where you put it. So put it somewhere you mean it. You see what's happened over a lifetime, don't you? We traded a plant that gives everything away for a bag that takes a little more out of the soil every year it feeds it. The fertilizer greens a plant up fast and leaves the ground a touch poorer each season, till a man's feeding the bag instead of the bed. Think of your soil like a savings passbook. Every leaf you lay down is a deposit that draws interest for years. Every bag of quick chemical is a withdrawal dressed up to look like a deposit. Comfrey is about the purest deposit a garden ever made. It mines the deep ground that was sitting there idle, and it banks it where your roots can spend it, free, season on season, while the rest of the world pays record prices for a sack of the same minerals dug up and shipped halfway round the earth. So I'll leave you with this. Right now the price of fertilizer is high as I've seen it, and a lot of good ground is going lifeless under it. And here sits one plant, buried by a cheap bag and a careless headline, that'll quietly feed a corner of your garden for the rest of your life off one root and a little patience. I'm not asking you to take my word for any of it. Bury one root this spring, somewhere along a fence where you'll be glad of it, and let the ground answer you the way it answered me, slow and honest and in its own time. Tell me down below what county you're in and what your soil's like, sandy or clay or that good black loam, and I'll do my best to point you right. I read every one. The ground remembers what we give it. The only question worth asking is what you're going to give it this year.